I'm Rebecca Martinez. And last Saturday night changed everything between my father and me forever. Picture this. I'm standing at the edge of an elegant ballroom, watching my dad beam with pride as he introduces my siblings to his company's CEO, describing their accomplishments in glowing detail. When it came to me, he simply said, "And this is Rebecca, nothing about my business, my achievements. Nothing." But when his boss asked where's the company owner we've been trying to reach, and I stepped forward to say, that would be me. The look on my father's face was something I'll never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life I've been the invisible daughter. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, in a traditional Mexican-American family, I learned early that success had very specific definitions in the Martinez household. My older brother Carlos became a lawyer. Exactly what my father dreamed of: suits, courtrooms, and the kind of prestige that made Dad's chest puff out at family gatherings. My younger sister Lutia followed a path that made perfect sense to everyone. She became a nurse, caring and nurturing. Everything a good daughter should be according to my parents' traditional values. Then there was me, the daughter who spent her teenage years building websites for local businesses instead of dating, who chose entrepreneurship over a traditional career path, who turned down multiple corporate job offers to build something of my own. At 31, I'm the founder and CEO of Martinez Digital Strategies, a full-service digital marketing agency that's grown from my childhood bedroom business into a company with 18 employees and a client roster that includes some of the Southwest's most recognizable brands. We specialize in helping traditional businesses transition into the digital age, and our success rate has caught the attention of major corporations across Arizona and New Mexico. But my family still sees me as the quirky daughter who plays with computers. It's not malicious. My parents love me. I know that. It's just that they've never quite understood what I do or why it matters. When people ask my father about his children, he lights up talking about Carlos defending his first major case, or Lutia saving lives in the emergency room. When it comes to me, he usually says something vague about me being good with technology, and quickly changes the subject. This dynamic became the background music of my life. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every major milestone celebration followed the same pattern. Carlos would share his latest legal victory, Lutia would tell heartwarming stories from the hospital, and I would sit quietly, knowing that any attempt to discuss my business would be met with polite nods and glazed expression. My mother, Carmen, always tried to be supportive, but even she struggled to understand how building Instagram campaigns and managing Google Ads could be a real career compared to her other children's more traditional paths. The thing about being consistently overlooked is that it becomes normal. You stop expecting recognition, stop feeling surprised when your accomplishments are dismissed, and eventually, you start to question whether what you're doing even matters. I'd built a six-figure business by 28, been featured in Arizona Business Magazine twice, and spoken at digital marketing conferences across the country. But none of that seemed to register with my family. They were proud, they claimed, but their pride felt distant and theoretical, like they were proud of me for having a hobby that paid well rather than building something substantial. My father, Miguel Martinez, had worked for Southwestern Construction Solutions for 32 years, climbing from entry-level estimator to senior project manager. His company specialized in large-scale commercial construction, shopping centers, office buildings, industrial complexes. It was traditional, concrete work that you could see and touch, unlike my digital world that seemed to exist only in the abstract to him. Dad valued loyalty, consistency, and climbing the corporate ladder through hard work and dedication. He couldn't understand why I'd walked away from perfectly good job offers at established companies to start something uncertain and risky. The irony wasn't lost on me, that my business had grown specifically because I understood what companies like Dad's needed. Traditional businesses were struggling to reach customers in an increasingly digital world, and my agency bridged that gap. We'd helped construction companies triple their leads through targeted online advertising, assisted manufacturers in building brand recognition through social media, and guided countless traditional businesses through digital transformations that saved or grew their company. But Dad saw my work as abstract and intangible, far removed from the solid, measurable world of construction projects. This disconnect became more pronounced as my business grew. When I hired my fifth employee, Dad asked if I was sure I could afford all those people. When I moved into a real office space, he worried I was getting ahead of myself. When I landed my first Fortune 500 client, he congratulated me but immediately warned me not to put all my eggs in one basket. Every success was met with concern disguised as wisdom. Every milestone was overshadowed by worry about sustainability. The most frustrating part was watching how differently he treated my siblings' achievement. When Carlos won his first major case, Dad called everyone in our extended family to share the news. When Lucia received a commendation for her work during a particularly challenging emergency, Dad printed copies of the article and handed them out at his work. But when I was profiled in the Phoenix Business Journal as one of the city's rising entrepreneurs under 35, he read the article politely and filed it away somewhere, never to be mentioned again. I tried not to let it bother me. I focused on building my business, serving my clients, and creating the life I wanted rather than the one my family expected. My success spoke for itself in profit margins and client testimonials, even if it didn't translate to family recognition. I dated occasionally but found that most people either didn't understand my business or were intimidated by my success, so I poured myself into work instead. My friendships were mostly professional relationships with other entrepreneurs who understood the unique challenges of building something from nothing. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Dad's retirement party. After 32 years with Southwestern Construction Solutions, the company was throwing him a celebration at the prestigious Desert Ridge Country Club. The guest list included the company's executives, major clients, and family members, a chance for Dad to showcase everything he was proud of after more than 3 decades of dedicated service. When he told us about the party, his excitement was infectious. This wasn't just any retirement celebration. This was validation of his entire career, proof that his loyalty and hard work had been recognized and valued. Dad spent weeks preparing for the event. He bought a new suit, got his hair cut professionally, and practiced his speech in front of the bathroom mirror. He talked endlessly about who would be there: the CEO he'd worked under for 15 years, the project directors he'd collaborated with on major builds, the clients who'd become friends over the years. Most importantly, he wanted to introduce his family to these important people, to show them what his decades of hard work had produced. When he discussed the introductions he planned to make, the pattern was predictable. He talked about presenting Carlos as his lawyer son, emphasizing how proud he was that Carlos had graduated law school and built a successful practice. He planned to introduce Lucia as his daughter, the nurse, highlighting her compassion and dedication to helping others. When it came to me, his plans were notably vague. "I'll introduce Rebecca too, of course," he'd say, but he never elaborated on what he'd say about me or what he was proud of regarding my career. I decided this party would be different. I'd recently signed the biggest contract in my company's history, a comprehensive digital marketing overhaul for a major retail chain that would nearly double our annual revenue. I'd also been selected to speak at the Southwest Digital Marketing Summit, the region's premier industry conference. These weren't small achievements, and I was determined to find a way to share them with Dad, to help him understand that what I'd built was substantial and successful. The week before the party, I tried multiple times to have a conversation with Dad about my business, hoping to give him talking points he could use when introducing me. Each attempt followed the same frustrating pattern. I'd start explaining a recent client success or industry recognition, and within minutes, Dad's attention would drift to more concrete concerns. Was I saving enough for retirement? Had I considered the tax implications of business growth? Wouldn't it be safer to work for an established company with benefits? Every conversation about my achievements turned into a lecture about financial prudence and career stability. The morning of the retirement party, I stood in front of my closet for an unusually long time, choosing my outfit. I wanted to look professional but not intimidating, Successful but not flashy. I settled on a burgundy dress that was elegant but understated, paired with minimal jewelry and low heels that would let me move comfortably through the evening's networking. I'd prepared talking points about my business, practiced describing my company's services in language that construction industry professionals would understand, and even researched some of the attendees to find potential conversation starters. The Desert Ridge Country Club was more elegant than I'd expected, with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. Round tables were covered in crisp white linens and adorned with centerpieces of desert flowers, while a jazz trio played softly in the corner. The guest list was impressive, easily 60 people representing every level of Southwestern Construction Solutions hierarchy, from junior estimators to the company's founding family members. Dad was in his element, moving from table to table with Mom by his side, greeting colleagues and sharing stories from 3 decades of shared projects and challenges. His face glowed with pride and satisfaction, and I found myself genuinely happy for him. This was his moment, his chance to be celebrated for years of dedicated work, and he deserved every minute of recognition he received. As the evening progressed, various company executives approached our family table to pay their respects and share memories of working with Dad. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: warm greetings, stories about Dad's reliability and expertise, and eventually curiosity about his family. That's when Dad's introductions would begin, and I watched the same scene play out multiple times throughout the evening. "I'd like you to meet my children," Dad would say, his voice rich with paternal pride. "This is my son Carlos. He's an attorney here in Phoenix, handles corporate law for some major clients, just won a big case last month that saved his client millions." Dad's chest would visibly swell as he detailed Carlos's achievements, mentioning his law school honors, his growing practice, and his reputation in the legal community. Then he'd turn to Lucia with equal enthusiasm. "And this is my daughter Lucia. She's a registered nurse at Phoenix General Hospital, works in the emergency department. She's saving lives every day, just received recognition for her work during that multi-car accident on the I-10 last month." Again, his pride was evident and specific, filled with concrete details about her accomplishments and the respect she'd earned in her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Field. When the conversation turned to me, the energy invariably shifted. "And this is my daughter Rebecca," Dad would say, his voice noticeably flatter, devoid of the warmth and specificity he'd used with my siblings. That was it. No mention of my business, my clients, my achievements, or even what I did for a living. Just "This is Rebecca," delivered with the same tone he might use to introduce a distant acquaintance rather than his daughter. The first time it happened, I told myself Dad was nervous or distracted. The second time, I rationalized that he might not know how to explain my business to construction industry professionals. By the fourth identical introduction, I realized this wasn't oversight or awkwardness. This was a deliberate choice. In Dad's mind, Carlos and Lucia had real accomplishments worth sharing, while I was simply someone who happened to be his daughter. Each dismissive introduction felt like a small slap, a public confirmation of what I'd suspected for years, but never wanted to acknowledge. In my father's eyes, I wasn't successful, I wasn't accomplished, I wasn't worth bragging about. I was just Rebecca, the daughter who did something with computers that he couldn't quite explain or understand. Certainly nothing important enough to mention to his respected colleague. I excused myself to the restroom after the fifth nearly identical introduction, my cheeks burning with embarrassment and my chest tight with hurt. In the mirror, I stared at my reflection and wondered why I'd expected anything different. This was the same pattern that had played out my entire life, just with a more elegant backdrop and a larger audience. I'd been foolish to think this party would somehow be the moment Dad finally saw me as successful, finally understood what I'd built, finally felt proud enough to share my achievements with others. When I returned to the main reception area, I intended to find a quiet corner where I could wait for the evening to end with minimal additional humiliation. But as I approached our family's table, I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. Standing near the bar, Dad was talking with a distinguished older man I recognized as Richard Kowalski, the CEO and founder of Southwestern Construction Solutions. Their conversation had clearly moved beyond pleasantries into business territory. "Miguel, I have to ask you about something," Mr. Kowalski was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting answers. "Our marketing director has been trying to reach Rebecca Martinez from Martinez Digital Strategies for weeks now. Her company came highly recommended for our digital transformation project, and we're particularly interested in her expertise with traditional industries making the digital transition. The proposal she submitted was exactly what we need, but we haven't been able to get a meeting scheduled. Do you happen to know how we might reach her more effectively?" I watched my father's face go completely blank, the kind of empty expression that appears when someone is asked about something entirely outside their knowledge base. "Rebecca Martinez," he repeated slowly, as if trying to place the name. "I'm not sure I'm familiar with that company. Martinez Digital Strategies. No, that doesn't ring a bell." Mr. Kowalski looked surprised. "Really? Our research indicated she's a local entrepreneur, built quite a reputation in the Phoenix business community over the past few years. Her company specializes in helping traditional businesses develop their digital presence, which is exactly what we need. The referrals we received were outstanding. Apparently she's worked with several construction and manufacturing companies, with remarkable results." The confusion on Dad's face deepened. "I'm sorry, Richard, but I really don't know anything about this company or this Rebecca Martinez person." "Are you sure she's local to Phoenix?" "Absolutely certain," Mr. Kowalski confirmed. "In fact, according to the business profile we found, she's been featured in Arizona Business Magazine multiple times. Young entrepreneur, very innovative approach to digital marketing for traditional industries. We specifically sought her out because her client testimonials from construction companies were so impressive." That's when I stepped forward, my heart pounding so hard I was certain everyone within 10 feet could hear it. "Excuse me, Miss Kowalski," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. I own Martinez Digital Strategies." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Mr. Kowalski's face immediately lit up with recognition and genuine excitement. "Rebecca, there you are. We've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks." He extended his hand enthusiastically, his entire demeanor shifting to one of professional respect and interest. "Your proposal for our digital marketing overhaul was brilliant. We'd love to move forward with your company as soon as possible." I shook his hand, maintaining eye contact and projecting the confidence I'd developed through years of business meetings and client presentations. "Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. I apologize for the delayed response. I've been traveling for speaking engagements, and may have missed some calls. I'd be delighted to discuss how Martinez Digital Strategies can help Southwestern Construction Solutions reach new markets and improve your customer acquisition." As I spoke, I was acutely aware of my father standing frozen beside us, his face cycling through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion gave way to recognition, recognition to shock, and shock to something that looked almost like panic. The man who had just told his boss he'd never heard of Rebecca Martinez or her company was now watching his own daughter conduct business with that same boss, discussing proposals and speaking engagements, as if she were exactly the accomplished professional Mr. Kowalski had described. "Your reputation in the industry is impressive," Mr. Kowalski continued, apparently oblivious to the family drama unfolding beside him. The testimonials from Apex Manufacturing and Desert Valley Logistics were particularly compelling. They both mentioned how your strategies increased their customer leads by over 200% within 6 months. "That's exactly the kind of growth we're looking for." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Kowalski detailing his company's needs and me responding with the kind of industry expertise and strategic thinking that had built my business's reputation. We discussed timeline, scope, and preliminary budget figures while my father stood speechless beside us, finally understanding that his computer girl daughter was not only a legitimate business owner, but someone his own CEO had specifically sought out for her expertise and reputation. When Mr. Kowalski excused himself to greet other guests, promising to have his assistant schedule a formal meeting for the following week, the aftermath was profound and uncomfortable. Dad stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, his mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to process what had just happened. The daughter he'd dismissed with, "And this is Rebecca," was the same person his respected boss had been trying to hire for weeks, the same entrepreneur whose business proposal had impressed the leadership of a company Dad had devoted 32 years of his life to serve. The silence that followed Mr. Kowalski's departure was deafening. My father stood there looking like someone had just explained quantum physics to him in a foreign language, his eyes darting between me and the spot where his CEO had been standing moments before. The confident, proud man who had been holding court all evening suddenly seemed smaller, uncertain, like he was questioning everything he thought he knew about his own family. "Rebecca," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, "what just happened? Did Richard Kowalski really say he's been trying to hire your company?" I looked at my father, this man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework, who had somehow managed to completely miss the fact that I had built exactly the kind of successful business he claimed to respect. The hurt I'd been carrying all evening crystallized into something sharper, more focused. This wasn't just about tonight's introductions anymore. This was about years of being invisible, years of having my achievements dismissed or ignored, years of watching him beam with pride over my siblings, while treating my success like an embarrassing hobby. "Yes, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "Mr. Kowalski's company has been trying to reach me for 3 weeks, about a major digital marketing contract. Martinez Digital Strategies has been shortlisted for their complete digital transformation project, which would be one of the largest contracts we've ever handled." Dad's brow furrowed as he processed this information. "But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't I know about this?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications he clearly hadn't considered. I could have laughed if the situation weren't so painfully ironic. Here was a man who had just spent the entire evening telling his colleagues he'd never heard of his own daughter's company, now asking why he didn't know about her biggest business opportunity. "I've tried to tell you about my business countless times over the years," I replied, my voice gaining strength as I spoke. "Every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call where you ask how things are going. I've mentioned clients, contracts, speaking engagements, industry recognition. But every time I try to share what's happening with my company, you either change the subject or start lecturing me about the importance of job security and traditional career paths." Dad's face flushed slightly and I could see him mentally reviewing recent conversations, perhaps finally recognizing the pattern I'd lived with for years. "I always listened when you talked about your work." "No, Dad, you really didn't. You heard words but you never actually listened. When I told you about landing the Apex manufacturing account last year, you asked if I was sure I could handle such a big client. When I mentioned speaking at the Digital Marketing Summit, you worried that I was spreading myself too thin. When I moved into the new office space, you questioned whether I could afford the overhead. Every single achievement I've shared with you has been met with concern or skepticism, never congratulation or pride." I watched as my words hit him, each example seeming to land with physical weight. For the first time in my adult life, I saw genuine surprise and what might have been regret cross his features, but I wasn't finished. Years of accumulated frustration were finally finding their voice. "Do you know what Martinez Digital Strategies actually does? Can you tell me about even one of our clients, or what services we provide? Because I've explained it dozens of times, but somehow you still introduce me as just Rebecca while you can recite Carlos's case history and Lucia's hospital commendations from memory." The silence stretched between us again, and I could see him struggling to formulate an answer. The truth was obvious to both of us now. Despite my repeated attempts to share my professional life with him, he had never bothered to retain any of it. My business, my success, my expertise existed in a blind spot he had created and maintained for years. Meanwhile, around us, the retirement party continued. Colleagues approached Dad periodically to share well wishes and memories, but I noticed several of them glancing at me with newfound interest after witnessing my conversation with Mr. Kowalski. Word was spreading through the room that Miguel Martinez's daughter was apparently the Rebecca Martinez whose company was making waves in the local business community. Tom Bradley, Southwestern Construction's Director of Operations, approached our table with a knowing smile. "Miguel, I had no idea your daughter was the owner of Martinez Digital Strategies. We've been hearing great things about her company from our industry contacts. Very impressive work with traditional businesses moving into digital market." Dad managed a weak smile and nodded, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was beginning to understand that his lack of awareness about my business wasn't just a personal oversight. It was a professional embarrassment. His colleagues knew more about his daughter's career than he did. "Rebecca's always been good with computers," Dad offered lamely, falling back on his standard deflection. Mr. Bradley laughed. "Good with computers? Miguel, from what I understand, she's revolutionizing how construction companies approach customer acquisition. That's a lot more than being good with computers." After Mr. Bradley moved on, Dad turned back to me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between confusion and wounded pride. "Why didn't you ever tell me your business was this significant?" The question revealed so much about how he'd been thinking about my work all these years. In Dad's mind, I apparently ran some small side business that paid decent money, but wasn't worth serious attention. The possibility that I had built something substantial, something that commanded respect in professional circles, had never occurred to him. "Dad, I did tell you. I've been telling you for years. My company has 18 employees. We've been featured in Arizona Business Magazine 3 times. I've spoken at industry conferences across the Southwest. I've won awards for innovation in digital marketing. Last year alone, we generated over $2 million in revenue for our clients. But every time I tried to share these achievements with you, you either looked bored, or changed the subject to something more practical, like whether I was contributing enough to my retirement account." The number 2 million seemed to register with Dad in a way that my previous attempts to communicate my success never had. His background in construction meant he understood revenue figures, could translate them into the kind of concrete success metrics he respected. For the first time, I saw him viewing my business through the lens of actual financial achievement, rather than dismissing it as some nebulous internet hobby. $2 million, he repeated, his voice carrying a note of respect that had been absent from every previous conversation about my work. "In client revenue, yeah. My company's fee structure means we generated about $400,000 in direct income last year, which allowed us to expand our team and invest in better technology. We're projected to break $600,000 this year, possibly more if we land the Southwestern construction contract." I watched Dad do the mental math, comparing my business income to his senior project manager salary, perhaps finally understanding that what I'd built wasn't just sustainable but actually more lucrative than the traditional corporate path he'd always pushed me toward. "Rebecca, I've been following your company's work for months. Your case study with Desert Valley Logistics was brilliant, transforming their lead generation through targeted social media campaigns while maintaining their traditional brand identity. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need for our own digital evolution." As Jennifer and I discussed the specific challenges facing construction companies in digital marketing, I noticed Dad listening intently, perhaps hearing details about my work for the first time, despite my years of attempted explanations. The technical aspects of SEO optimization, content marketing strategy, and digital customer journey mapping were clearly foreign to him, but he seemed to be grasping the complexity and sophistication involved in what I did professionally. "Your daughter has quite a reputation in our industry," Jennifer told Dad as our conversation wound down. "I've heard her speak at conferences, and her insights into bridging traditional business practices with digital innovation are exactly what companies like ours need to stay competitive." After Jennifer left, Dad looked at me with something approaching awe. "You speak at conferences about business strategy?" "I've been a featured speaker at the Southwest Digital Marketing Summit for 3 years running," I replied. "This year I'm presenting the keynote address on digital transformation for traditional industries. It's actually how Mr. Kowalski first heard about my company." through my presentation last year about helping construction companies modernize their customer acquisition strategy. The revelation that his own CEO had discovered my company through my speaking reputation seemed to hit Dad particularly hard. In his world, being invited to speak at industry conferences represented a level of professional recognition he deeply respected. Suddenly, my computer work was reframed as expertise valuable enough that industry leaders paid to hear my insights. Why didn't I know about any of this? He asked again, but this time the question carried a different weight. Instead of accusation, it held genuine confusion and what might have been regret. Because every time I tried to tell you, you weren't really listening, I said gently. The anger from earlier had given way to something sadder but more honest. Dad, I love you, and I know you love me, but for years, you've had this idea in your head about what real success looks like. And my path didn't fit that picture. So instead of trying to understand what I was building, you just dismissed. The party was beginning to wind down, with guests gradually making their way to Dad for final congratulations and goodbye. Several more colleagues stopped by our table, and the pattern continued. Warm greetings for Dad, followed by surprised recognition and professional respect when they realized I was the Rebecca Martinez they'd heard about in business circles. By the end of the evening, Dad had experienced what could only be described as a complete paradigm shift. The daughter he'd been introducing as an afterthought all night was actually someone his professional community knew and respected. Someone whose expertise was valuable enough that his own company wanted to hire her for a major project. As we gathered our things to leave, Dad approached me with an expression I'd never seen before. Part apology, part admiration, part confusion about how he'd misunderstood his own daughter's life so completely. Rebecca, I owe you an apology, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I realize now that I haven't been paying attention to what you've actually accomplished. I thought I was being practical, looking out for your financial security, but I see now that I was just being dismissive. The apology was more than I'd expected, but it also highlighted how deep the disconnect had been. This wasn't just about tonight's embarrassing introductions or his shock at learning about the Southwestern construction opportunity. This was about years of systematic dismissal, years of making me feel like my achievements didn't matter because they didn't fit his narrow definition of success. I appreciate the apology, Dad, I said carefully, but this isn't just about tonight. This is about a pattern that's been going on for years. Every time I've tried to share my professional life with you, you've found ways to minimize it or redirect the conversation. It's not just that you didn't know about my business success, it's that you actively chose not to know, because acknowledging it would have required you to admit that my path was valid. Dad was quiet for a long moment, perhaps finally understanding the full scope of what his dismissive attitude had cost our relationship. The car ride home was subdued, with Mom trying to fill the silence with observations about the lovely venue and the elegant catering, while Dad stared out the window, lost in thoughts I could only imagine. When we reached my parents' house, where I'd left my car, Dad walked me to the driver's side door, something he hadn't done in years. Rebecca, he said, his voice uncertain, I'd like to learn more about your business, about what you actually do, not just the general idea but the specifics, the real details. The request was so unexpected, so different from years of dismissive responses to my professional updates, that I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to protect myself from further disappointment, to assume this newfound interest would fade once the shock of tonight wore off, but another part of me, the part that had always hoped for this exact moment, wanted to give him the chance to actually understand what I'd built. I'd like that too, Dad, I said finally, but it has to be real interest, not just guilt over what happened tonight. I can't keep putting myself in the position of trying to prove my success is legitimate. Either you want to understand my work because you respect it, or we keep things surface level like we have been. Dad nodded solemnly. I understand, and I do want to understand. Really understand. I realize tonight that I've been blind to something important in your life, and I want to change that. As I drove home through the quiet Phoenix streets, my mind raced through the evening's events. In the span of a few hours, everything had changed between Dad and me. The invisible daughter had suddenly become visible, not through anything I'd done differently, but because his professional world had forced him to see what had been there all along. The validation from Mr. Walski and Dad's colleagues felt good, but it also highlighted something painful. My father's respect for my achievements was contingent on other people's recognition. He couldn't see my success until his CEO pointed it out, couldn't understand my expertise until his colleagues expressed admiration for it. The pride he'd shown for Carlos and Lucia had been immediate and unconditional, based on his own understanding of their work. But with me, external validation had been required before he could acknowledge what I'd accomplished. Still, as I pulled into my driveway and reflected on the evening's revelations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope that my relationship with Dad might finally evolve beyond the patterns that had defined it for so long. Whether that hope was justified remained to be seen, but for the first time, the possibility of real understanding between us felt achievable. The retirement party had ended, but in many ways, this was just the beginning of a much more important conversation about family, respect, and what it truly means to see and value the people we love most. The following Monday morning brought a call I never expected. Dad's voice on the other end of the line was tentative, almost nervous, completely different from his usual confident tone when he called to check in with his children. "Rebecca, do you have time to talk? I mean really talk, not just the usual how are things conversation. I'd like to take you to lunch this week if you're available. I want to learn about your business properly this time." I stared at my office wall, processing the request. In 31 years, my father had never asked to take me to lunch specifically to discuss my career. Family meals, yeah, casual catch-ups, certainly, but a deliberate, focused conversation about my professional life. This was uncharted territory. "I have Thursday afternoon free," I heard myself saying. "There's a quiet restaurant near my office, where we could talk without interruption." We agreed to meet at Sage Bistro, a small place I'd discovered during client lunches, where the atmosphere encouraged longer conversations. As I hung up, I realized I was both hopeful and terrified. This could be the breakthrough I'd wanted for years, or it could be another disappointment disguised as interest that would fade once Dad's guilt over Saturday night wore off. The days leading up to our lunch were surreal. Word about Saturday night's revelation had apparently spread through Dad's social circles, because I started receiving calls and emails from people I barely knew. My Aunt Rosa, Dad's sister, called Tuesday evening with barely contained glee. "Nisha, your father called your Uncle Roberto yesterday, completely flustered, trying to understand how he'd missed that you were some kind of business hotshot. Roberto just laughed and told him he's been bragging about your company to his construction buddies for 2 years. Your dad had no idea Roberto even knew what you did for work." This information stunned me. Uncle Roberto, Dad's younger brother who owned a small contracting business, had apparently been following my company's success and even referring potential clients my way. He'd never mentioned this to Dad, probably assuming Dad already knew about his daughter's professional reputation. Roberto said, "Miguel looked like someone had told him the earth was flat," Rosa continued with amusement. "Apparently your father spent an hour asking questions about your business that Roberto couldn't believe he didn't already know the answers to." Wednesday brought an unexpected email from Carlos that showed just how much Saturday night had shifted our family dynamic. My brother, who had always been supportive but somewhat patronizing about my little business, wrote with newfound respect and curiosity, "Becca, I've been doing some research since Saturday night, and I had no idea you were speaking at major conferences and working with Fortune 500 companies. I feel like an ass for never taking your work seriously. Would you be open to grabbing coffee sometime? I'd love to hear about how you built everything, and honestly, I could use some advice. My law practice could benefit from better digital marketing, and I'd rather work with family than some random agency." The email revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated. My siblings' dismissive attitude toward my career had been largely influenced by Dad's perspective. They'd followed his lead in treating my business as a hobby rather than forming their own opinions about my professional achievements. Now that Dad's viewpoint was shifting, theirs was changing too. Thursday arrived with unseasonable coolness for Phoenix in late spring, and I chose my outfit carefully for lunch with Dad. I wanted to strike the right balance between professional credibility and approachable daughter, settling on a navy blazer over dark jeans with minimal jewelry. As I drove to Sage Bistro, I rehearsed potential conversation topics, determined to be honest about my experiences while remaining open to the possibility of genuine change in our relationship. Dad was already seated when I arrived, studying the menu with unusual intensity. He looked up when I approached and I noticed something different in his expression, a mixture of nervousness and determination that I'd never seen before. He stood to hug me, another departure from his usual casual greeting. "Thank you for making time for this," he said, as we settled into our seats. "I know you're busy with important work and I realize now that I've never really acknowledged how busy or how important." The waiter took our orders, and then we faced each other across the small table with the weight of years of miscommunication between us. Dad cleared his throat several times before speaking, clearly struggling with how to begin a conversation he'd never learned how to have. "Rebecca, I need to start by saying something I should have said years ago. I'm proud of you, not just proud that you're my daughter, but proud of what you've accomplished, what you've built, what you've become, and I'm sorry it took Richard Kowalski pointing it out for me to see it clearly." The apology was more specific and heartfelt than Saturday night's rushed words, but it also highlighted the painful truth we both understood. His pride was conditional on external validation. Still, it was a beginning, and I decided to accept it as such. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot to hear, even if it took a while to get here. I want to understand what I missed," he continued, leaning forward with an intensity that surprised me. "Start from the beginning. Tell me how you built your company, what services you actually provide, who your clients are. Pretend I know nothing, because apparently I don't." So, I began at the beginning, explaining how I'd started freelancing during college, building websites for local businesses and learning about digital marketing through trial and error. I described the transition from freelance work to agency services, the challenge of hiring employees, the complexity of managing multiple client accounts simultaneously. Dad listened with a focus I'd never experienced from him before, asking detailed questions about revenue models, client acquisition strategies, and operational challenges. His construction background meant he understood business fundamentals like overhead, profit margins, and cash flow management, and I watched his respect grow as I explained how I'd navigated these same challenges in a completely different industry. "So, when you say you generated $2 million in client revenue last year, you mean your marketing campaigns directly resulted in $2 million in new business for your clients?" he asked, seeking clarification. "Exactly, we track everything meticulously. When I tell a construction company that our digital strategy will increase their leads by 200%, we have the data to prove it. For Apex Manufacturing, our social media campaigns and search engine optimization resulted in $12 million in new contracts over 18 months. Our fee was $300,000, which they considered the best investment they'd ever made." I watched Dad process these numbers, translating them into the kind of concrete business success he understood and respected. For the first time, he was seeing my work not as abstract internet activities, but as measurable business results that directly impacted company bottom lines. "And companies actually pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars for this marketing work?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine amazement. "The largest contract we've signed is worth $800,000 over 2 years, I confirmed. The Southwestern construction opportunity could be even bigger depending on the scope of their digital transformation project. These aren't small investments for companies. They're strategic decisions that can determine whether traditional businesses thrive or fail in a digital marketplace." Our conversation continued through lunch and well into the afternoon. Dad asked about my employees, wanting to know about their backgrounds, their expertise, their career development within my company. He seemed particularly interested in my leadership responsibilities, perhaps finally understanding that being a CEO required the same management skills he'd developed as a senior project manager, just applied to a different industry. "Maria, my lead strategist, has a master's degree in marketing from ASU and 5 years of experience with major advertising agencies before I hired her," I explained. "David, our SEO specialist, is certified in Google Analytics and has helped increase website traffic for dozens of clients." "These aren't entry-level positions, Dad. I'm managing a team of professionals with specialized expertise." The pride in my voice as I described my team seemed to register with Dad in a way my previous attempts to share this information never had. He was finally hearing details instead of dismissing concepts, finally understanding that my role as a business owner involved the same leadership challenges he'd faced in managing construction projects. I had no idea, he admitted, shaking his head. When you talked about your employees before, I guess I pictured. His mental image of my company had been so far from reality that my attempts to explain our actual operations had been meaningless to him. He'd been operating from a completely false baseline, which explained why nothing I'd told him over the years had registered as significant. Dad, why do you think you had such a hard time understanding what I was doing? Carlos talks about legal concepts that are just as complex, but you never seem confused about his work. Dad was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I think it's because I understood Carlos's path: college, law school, junior associate, building a practice. Those are steps I could follow even if I'd never been a lawyer myself, but your path was completely foreign to me. Starting a business while still in college, working with clients I'd never heard of, dealing with technology I didn't understand. It was easier to dismiss it than to admit I had no idea what you were talking about. The honesty was refreshing, even if the admission was painful. Dad's dismissive attitude hadn't been malicious. It had been defensive, rather than acknowledge his lack of understanding about digital marketing and entrepreneurship. He'd chosen to minimize the importance of what I was doing. But why didn't you just ask questions? When I mentioned speaking at conferences or landing major clients, why didn't you want to know more details? Because I was afraid you'd realize I didn't understand any of it, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I've always been the dad with answers, the one who could give advice about work and career decisions. With Carlos and Lucia, I could draw on my own experience, offer guidance that made sense, but with your business, I felt completely lost. It was easier to pretend it wasn't that important than to admit I had no idea how to be helpful. This revelation reframed years of frustrating conversation. Dad's apparent disinterest hadn't been about lack of caring. It had been about feeling inadequate and choosing avoidance over vulnerability. He'd been protecting his image as the knowledgeable father rather than admitting he needed to learn about his daughter's world. Dad, I never needed you to have all the answers about digital marketing. I just needed you to be interested, to ask questions, to show that you cared about something that was important to me. When you dismissed my work, it felt like you were dismissing. The impact of my words was visible on his face. Dad looked stricken as he understood, perhaps for the first time, how his defensive behavior had affected our relationship. His attempt to preserve his role as the wise patriarch had actually damaged his connection with his daughter. I never wanted you to feel dismissed, he said quietly. I thought I was being practical, encouraging you to consider more stable career options. I didn't realize that what you were building was already more stable and more successful than most traditional careers. Our conversation shifted to my current projects and future plans. I explained the speaking engagement at next month's Digital Marketing Summit, the expansion into video production services, the possibility of opening a second office in Tucson. Dad listened with genuine engagement, asking thoughtful questions about market research, competitive analysis, and growth strategies. So this keynote speech you're giving, other business owners will be there to learn from your expertise? He asked, still marveling at the concept of his daughter as an industry thought leader. About 800 attendees from across the Southwest, I confirmed, construction companies, manufacturing firms, retail businesses, all trying to figure out how to compete in digital marketing. The conference organizers specifically requested my presentation on bridging traditional business practices with modern marketing techniques. Dad shook his head in amazement. 800 people paying to hear you speak about business strategy. And I've been worried about whether you were saving enough for retirement. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. While Dad had been concerned about my financial security, I'd been building a business that provided greater income stability than most traditional employment. His outdated understanding of entrepreneurship had prevented him from recognizing that I'd achieved exactly the kind of professional success he valued most. As our lunch extended into the late afternoon, Dad asked about my personal life with the same newfound interest he'd shown in my business. He wanted to know how I balanced work demands with relationships, whether I was happy with the choices I'd made, what challenges I faced as a young business owner in a competitive market. Are you happy, Rebecca? He asked direct. Not just financially successful, but genuinely satisfied with the life you've built. The The question caught me off guard with its sincerity. Yes, Dad, I am. Building this company has been the most challenging and rewarding thing I've ever done. I love the strategic thinking, the problem solving, the relationships with clients. I love knowing that my work directly helps other businesses succeed. I wake up excited about projects I'm working on, and personally, dating, relationships, the possibility of marriage and family someday. I appreciated that he was asking rather than lecturing, showing interest in my perspective rather than imposing his own timeline for my life decisions. I'm open to those possibilities, but I'm not going to compromise what I've built for someone who doesn't understand or respect my career. My business isn't a placeholder until I find a husband, Dad. It's my life's work. Dad nodded thoughtfully. I understand that now, and any man who couldn't see what an incredible woman you are, what an amazing thing you've built, wouldn't be worthy of you anyway. The conversation revealed how much Dad's perspective had shifted in just 5 days. Saturday night's revelation had forced him to completely reevaluate his understanding of my life, my capabilities, and my choices. But more than that, it had opened a door to honest communication that had been closed for years. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Dad made a request that surprised me. Rebecca, would you be willing to have dinner with your mother and me this weekend? I'd like to hear more about your business, and I think your mom would too. Also, I want to apologize to her for all the times I discouraged her from asking you about work details. I realize now that I shut down conversations about your career even when she was curious. This admission revealed another layer of how Dad's dismissive attitude had affected our family dynamic. Mom's apparent lack of interest in my business hadn't been entirely genuine. Dad had been actively discouraging detailed discussions about my work, probably to avoid exposing his own lack of understanding. I'd like that, I agreed. And Dad, thank you for today, for really listening, for asking real questions, for wanting to understand. This is the conversation I've been hoping we could have for years. As I drove back to my office, I reflected on the profound shift that had occurred in my relationship with Dad. Saturday night's public revelation had been embarrassing and painful, but it had also shattered the barriers that had prevented authentic communication between us. For the first time, Dad saw me as I actually was, rather than as he'd assumed I should be. The damage from years of dismissal wouldn't disappear overnight. Trust would need to be rebuilt, and Dad would need to prove that his newfound interest was genuine and lasting. But for the first time in years, I felt optimistic about the possibility of having a real relationship with my father, one based on mutual respect and honest understanding, rather than his predetermined notions of what my life should look like. The retirement party had ended with revelation and shock, but this lunch had begun something much more valuable, the foundation for a relationship built on truth rather than assumptions, on curiosity rather than dismissal, on pride rather than disappointment. Whether that foundation would support lasting change remained to be seen, but the groundwork had finally been laid. 3 months later, I stood backstage at the Phoenix Convention Center, adjusting my lapel microphone and reviewing my keynote notes one final time. The Southwest Digital Marketing Summit had grown beyond all expectations, with over 1,200 registered attendees instead of the anticipated 800. As the featured speaker for digital transformation in traditional industries, I was about to address the largest audience of my career. What made this moment even more significant was the knowledge that somewhere in that sea of business professionals sat my entire family. Dad had not only attended every speaking engagement I'd had since our lunch conversation, but he'd also convinced Mom, Carlos, and Lucia to join him for this keynote presentation. For a man who 6 months ago couldn't explain what his daughter did for a living, his transformation into my most enthusiastic supporter had been remarkable to witness. The conference organizer, Sarah Chen, approached with a warm smile. Rebecca, there's quite a buzz about your presentation today. We've had multiple Fortune 500 companies specifically mention your speaking reputation when they registered. Are you ready to inspire some minds? I nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that preceded every major presentation, as ready as I'll ever be. Thank you for this opportunity, Sarah. Speaking at the summit has become one of the highlights of my professional year. Before you go on, I wanted to mention that we've received several interview requests from business publications. Your company's growth trajectory,
and your thought leadership in digital transformation have caught significant media attention. Would you be interested in scheduling some post-conference interview? The media interest represented another milestone in my professional journey, but what struck me most was how naturally I'd come to accept these opportunities. 6 months ago, I might have felt imposter syndrome about being recognized as an industry expert. Now, after years of proven results and Dad's newfound validation, I felt confident in my expertise and comfortable with the recognition it brought. I'd be happy to participate in interviews, I replied. Have my assistant coordinate the scheduling with your media contact. As Sarah departed, I took a moment to center myself before the presentation. The past 3 months had brought extraordinary changes, both professionally. The Southwestern Construction Solutions contract had been even more substantial than anticipated, resulting in a comprehensive digital overhaul that positioned my company as the premier agency for traditional business transformation in the Southwest. But beyond the professional achievements, the evolution of my relationship with Dad had been the most meaningful change. Our weekly lunch meetings had become a cherished routine, with Dad genuinely engaging in detailed discussions about business strategy, client relationships, and industry trends.
He knows more marketing terminology now than some people who work in the industry. Last Sunday, he spent 20 minutes explaining to cousin Michael why his plumbing business needs a social media strategy. The conference announcer's voice brought me back to the present moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Rebecca Martinez, CEO of Martinez Digital Strategies and recognized thought leader in digital transformation for traditional industries. I walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, immediately spotting my family in the 5th row. Dad was beaming with unmistakable pride, his phone already out to record portions of my presentation. The sight of him documenting my speech with the same enthusiasm he'd once reserved for Carlos's court victories or Lucia's nursing achievements filled me with profound satisfaction. "Good morning, and thank you for that warm welcome," I began, looking out over the packed auditorium. 6 years ago, I started a small digital marketing business with one simple belief, that traditional industries weren't obsolete, they just needed better tools to reach modern customers. Today, I want to share what I've learned about bridging the gap between time-tested business practices and cutting-edge digital strategies. The presentation flowed smoothly, with audience engagement exceeding my expectations. I shared case studies from my work with construction companies, manufacturing firms, and professional services, demonstrating how digital transformation could enhance rather than replace traditional business strengths. Questions from the audience were thoughtful and challenging, covering everything from artificial intelligence integration to maintaining authentic brand identity during digital evolution. During the question and answer session, a familiar voice caught my attention. "Rebecca, thank you for that insightful presentation. I'm Richard Kowalski from Southwestern Construction Solutions. Could you speak to how traditional industry leaders can overcome their resistance to digital change, particularly when they feel overwhelmed by technological complexity?" I smiled, recognizing the question as both genuine curiosity and a subtle endorsement of my expertise for the benefit of other attendees. "That's an excellent question, Mr. Kowalski, and one that speaks to the heart of successful digital transformation. The key is starting with education rather than implementation. When business leaders understand that digital marketing amplifies their existing strengths rather than replacing them entirely, resistance typically transforms into enthusiasm. I elaborated on change management strategies, emphasizing the importance of connecting digital tools to measurable business outcomes rather than focusing on technical complexity. The response from the audience suggested that many attendees were grappling with similar challenges in their own organization. After the presentation concluded to standing ovation, I was immediately surrounded by conference attendees wanting to discuss potential collaborations, speaking opportunities, and consulting projects. The networking session extended well beyond the scheduled time, with business cards flowing freely, and several significant potential partnerships emerging from conversations. When the crowd finally thinned, my family approached with expressions of pride and amazement that warmed my heart. Dad was practically glowing as he embraced me, his emotion evident despite his attempts to maintain composure. "Misha, that was incredible," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "Watching you command that stage, seeing how those business leaders hung on every word you said, understanding for the first time what it means when people call you an expert in your field. I'm so proud of you I could burst. Mom wiped away tears as she hugged me tightly. Rebecca, I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were successful, but seeing you up there, watching how respectfully everyone treated you, hearing the sophistication of your knowledge, you've built something truly extraordinary. Carlos and Lucia were equally effusive in their praise, but their comments revealed how much their own perspectives had evolved since Dad's retirement party. They spoke about my presentation with genuine professional respect, asking detailed questions about my strategic recommendations and expressing admiration for my expertise. Becca, I have to admit something, Carlos said as we walked toward the conference exit. For years, I thought your business was impressive but somehow less substantial than traditional careers. Watching you today, understanding the complexity of what you do, recognizing the respect you command in your industry, I realize how wrong I was. You're not just successful, you're a genuine thought leader. The acknowledgement from Carlos meant more than he probably realized. As the sibling who had always been positioned as the family's professional achievement standard, his recognition of my expertise carried particular weight. It represented the final piece of family validation I hadn't realized I'd been seeking. The celebration dinner that evening, at one of Phoenix's finest restaurants, became a milestone moment for our family. Dad insisted on making a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. To my daughter Rebecca, who built something amazing while the rest of us weren't paying nearly enough attention. You've taught me that success comes in many forms, that innovation requires courage, and that sometimes the people we love most surprise us in the most wonderful way. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was right in front of me, but I promise to never stop appreciating what you've accomplished. The months that followed brought continued growth for both my business and my family relationship. The media interviews generated significant industry recognition, leading to invitations to speak at national conferences and opportunities to expand Martinez digital strategies into new markets. We opened the Tucson office ahead of schedule and began exploring opportunities in Denver and Las Vegas. Dad became my unofficial business advisor, applying his decades of project management experience to help me think through operational challenges and growth strategy. His construction industry background provided valuable insights into traditional business mindsets, helping me refine my approach to client education and change management. More importantly, our relationship had evolved into genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared interest. Our weekly lunches had expanded to include Mom, creating a new family tradition centered on authentic communication and collective support for each other's endeavors. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Years of miscommunication and misunderstanding couldn't be erased overnight, and there were moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But the foundation of respect we'd built proved strong enough to support honest conversations about past hurts and future expectations. 1 year after the retirement party that changed everything, Dad called me with excitement in his voice that reminded me of a child with wonderful news to share. Rebecca, you'll never believe what just happened. I was having coffee with some of the guys from my old construction crew, and they were complaining about how hard it is to find good digital marketing help. I spent an hour explaining what you do, how your strategies work, why traditional businesses need digital transformation. By the end of our conversation, 3 of them wanted your business card. The pride in his voice was unmistakable and deeply satisfying. Dad had become not just a supporter of my career, but an active advocate for my expertise. He understood my work well enough to explain it to others, respected my achievements enough to promote them confidently, and valued my success enough to take personal pride in sharing it. Dad, thank you for believing in me and for taking the time to really understand what I've built. Having your support means everything to me. Misha, I should be thanking you. You never gave up on our relationship even when I was too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. You built something incredible, and you did it with grace and determination, even when your own family wasn't cheering you on the way we should have been. The conversation reminded me how far we'd all traveled from that painful retirement party evening. What had begun as public embarrassment and private hurt had ultimately become the catalyst for deeper understanding and stronger relationships. The revelation that forced Dad to confront his own blindness had opened doors to communication and connection that might never have developed otherwise. 2 years later, as I stood once again in the spotlight at another industry conference, this time delivering the opening keynote at the National Digital Transformation Summit in Dallas, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The audience of over 2,000 business leaders represented the largest and most prestigious speaking opportunity of my career. But what made it truly special was knowing that my entire family would be watching the live stream from Phoenix, cheering me on with genuine understanding and authentic pride. The girl who had once felt invisible in her own family had built a business that commanded national attention and respect. More importantly, she had finally found her voice within her family, demanding the recognition she deserved and refusing to accept dismissal as normal or acceptable. The retirement party had been ending disguised as a beginning. It marked the end of accepting less than I deserved from the people who claimed to love me most, and the beginning of relationships built on truth, respect, and genuine appreciation for who I actually was, rather than who others thought I should be. As I prepared to take the stage in Dallas, I thought about that young woman standing in the corner of an elegant ballroom, feeling dismissed and invisible while her father introduced everyone except her. She couldn't have imagined that her moment of greatest humiliation would become the foundation for her greatest personal victory, finally being seen, understood, and celebrated by the family she'd never stopped loving, even when they failed to love her back the way she deserved. The journey from invisible daughter to recognized expert had been worth every challenging moment, every difficult conversation, every painful realization along the way. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who love us best but see us least clearly. And sometimes when the truth finally emerges, it has the power to transform, not just individual relationships, but entire family dynamics in ways that create stronger, more authentic connections than ever existed before. The applause began as I walked onto the Dallas stage, but the sound that mattered most was the notification on my phone from Dad. "We're watching, Mija. Make them all understand what we finally figured out, that you're extraordinary," and with that blessing, I stepped into the spotlight once again, ready to share my expertise with an audience that already understood what had taken my family years to recognize, that success comes in many forms, that expertise deserves respect regardless of its packaging, and that sometimes the most traditional industries need the most innovative thinking to survive and thrive in an evolving world. 5 years have passed since that transformative retirement party, and I'm sitting in my corner office on the 23rd floor of Phoenix's newest business district, gazing out at the city skyline while reflecting on how dramatically life can change when truth finally surfaces. Martinez Digital Strategies now occupies an entire floor of this gleaming tower, with 42 employees across 3 offices in Phoenix, Tucson, and Denver. The company that once operated from my cramped apartment has become the Southwest's premier digital transformation consultancy, with a client roster spanning from boutique family businesses to multinational corporations. The morning started with a call that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago. Harvard Business School had invited me to serve as a guest lecturer for their entrepreneurship program, specifically to discuss building successful businesses in emerging digital markets. The invitation came with a prestigious fellowship opportunity that would allow me to spend a semester in Cambridge, working with graduate students while developing case studies based on my company's growth trajectory. As I reviewed the Harvard proposal, my assistant knocked on my office door with a familiar expression of barely contained excitement. "Rebecca, your father is here for your lunch meeting, and he brought someone with him he'd like you to meet." Dad had maintained our weekly lunch tradition even as both our schedules had grown increasingly demanding. What had started as relationship repair had evolved into a cherished personal and professional collaboration. His insights from 3 decades in construction management had proven invaluable as I navigated the complexities of scaling a service-based business, and his network of traditional industry contacts had generated some of our most successful client relationships. I walked to the reception area to find Dad standing with a distinguished woman in her 60s, both of them examining the awards and recognition certificates that lined our lobby wall. The display had grown considerably over the years, featuring everything from local business excellence awards to national recognition for innovation in digital marketing strategy. "Rebecca, I'd like you to meet Margaret Whitfield," Dad said, his voice carrying that familiar note of pride that still made my heart warm. She's the new CEO of Mountain States Manufacturing, and she's been asking everyone in the construction industry for recommendations about digital marketing consultants. Your name came up in every single conversation. Margaret extended her hand with a warm smile. Martinez, your reputation precedes you. I've been hearing about your company's work for months, but your father's enthusiasm for your expertise finally convinced me to reach out directly. We're looking at a complete digital transformation for our manufacturing operations, and from what I understand, bridging traditional industry practices with modern technology is exactly your specialty. The meeting represented exactly the kind of high-level opportunity that had become routine for my company, but what struck me most was Dad's role in facilitating the introduction. The man who had once dismissed my business as computer work had become one of my most effective ambassadors, actively connecting me with potential clients and advocating for my expertise in professional circles I might never have accessed otherwise. Over lunch, at our usual restaurant, Margaret detailed Mountain States Manufacturing's challenges and objectives. The company employed over 3,000 people across 5 states, with annual revenue exceeding $200 million. Their leadership team had recognized that digital transformation was essential for remaining competitive, but they needed guidance on implementing changes without disrupting established operational excellence. What concerns me most, Margaret explained, is maintaining our company culture and employee relationships while adopting new technologies and marketing approaches. We've been successful for 40 years using traditional business practices, but we're losing market share to competitors who better understand digital customer acquisition. The conversation reminded me of hundreds of similar discussions I'd had with traditional industry leaders over the years. The challenge wasn't just technical implementation but change management that preserved organizational strengths while embracing innovation. These were exactly the kinds of complex strategic problems that had become my company's signature expertise. Margaret, the key to successful digital transformation in established companies is evolutionary rather than revolutionary change, I explained. We don't replace what's working, we enhance it with digital tools that amplify your existing strength. Your 4 decades of operational excellence become the foundation for digital innovation, not an obstacle to overcome. As I outlined our approach to traditional industry transformation, I noticed Dad listening with the same focused attention he'd developed over our years of weekly conversation. His understanding of digital marketing concepts had grown sophisticated enough that he occasionally offered insights that enhanced my client presentations. Rebecca's team worked with Southwestern Construction Solutions on exactly this kind of transformation, Dad interjected. They maintained everything that made the company successful while adding digital capabilities that tripled their customer leads within 18 months. The transition was so smooth that employees barely noticed the changes, but the business results were dramatic. Margaret's expression brightened with interest. I'd love to hear more about that case study. Southwestern Construction has a reputation for operational excellence that I greatly respect. I spent the next hour detailing our work with Dad's former company, explaining how we'd developed digital marketing strategies that complemented rather than complicated their established business processes. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations, with Southwestern Construction becoming a model for successful digital transformation in the construction industry. What impresses me most about your approach, Margaret said, as our meeting concluded, is how you understand both the technical and human aspects of organizational change. Most consultants focus on one or the other, but you clearly appreciate that successful transformation requires both components. We scheduled a formal presentation for the following week, with Margaret requesting a comprehensive proposal for Mountain States Manufacturing's digital transformation. The potential contract would be among the largest in my company's history, representing not just significant revenue, but an opportunity to demonstrate our capabilities at an unprecedented scale. After Margaret departed, Dad and I continued our conversation over coffee, discussing the strategic implications of the Mountain States opportunity and the broader trends affecting traditional manufacturing companies. I have to tell you something, Rebecca, Dad said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Watching you conduct that meeting, seeing how naturally you navigated complex business discussions, understanding the expertise you've developed over these years, I'm constantly amazed by what you've built. But more than that, I'm proud of how you've built it.
The compliment touched me deeply, particularly coming from someone whose opinion had once seemed impossible to earn. Dad's respect for my professional capabilities had grown from reluctant acknowledgement to genuine admiration, based on years of witnessing my strategic thinking and business acumen in action. "What do you mean by how I've built it?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "I mean with integrity, with respect for your employees, with genuine care for your clients' success. You could have built a company focused solely on profit maximization, but instead you've created something that actually helps businesses and supports people's careers. That's the kind of leadership I always hoped my children would demonstrate, even if I didn't recognize it at first." The conversation reminded me how much our relationship had evolved beyond simple professional respect. Dad had become not just a supporter of my business, but a student of my leadership philosophy, often asking thoughtful questions about management challenges and strategic decisions. "I learned a lot about leadership from watching you manage construction projects over the years," I replied. "Your emphasis on team collaboration, attention to detail, and long-term relationship building influenced how I approach client work and employee development." The acknowledgement seemed to surprise Dad, who had never considered that his own professional example might have shaped my business practices. "I never thought about it that way. I guess I was so focused on what I didn't understand about your work that I missed how much of what I did understand had influenced your approach." Our conversation was interrupted by a call from my office. Sarah, my executive assistant, apologized for the interruption but explained that CNN Business was requesting an interview about my upcoming Harvard Fellowship and its implications for entrepreneurship education. "They want to discuss your perspective on teaching traditional business transformation to the next generation of leaders," Sarah explained. The interviewer mentioned that your combination of practical experience and academic insight makes you uniquely qualified to bridge theory and application. The media attention represented another milestone in my professional journey, but what struck me most was how naturally I'd come to accept these opportunities. 5 years ago, I might have felt imposter syndrome about being positioned as an expert worthy of national media coverage. Now, after years of proven results and consistent recognition, I felt confident in my expertise and comfortable with the platform it provided. "Schedule the interview for Thursday afternoon," I told Sarah, "and please coordinate with the Harvard Fellowship office to ensure our timeline aligns with their announcement schedule." After ending the call, I found Dad watching me with an expression of wonder that had become familiar but no less meaningful over the years. "CNN Business wants to interview you about teaching at Harvard," he said, as if testing the reality of the work. "My daughter, who I once worried wasn't building a stable career, is now considered enough of an expert that Ivy League universities want her expertise and national media wants her opinion." The transformation in Dad's perception of my career had been one of the most rewarding aspects of our relationship evolution. His journey from dismissive concern to enthusiastic advocacy had required him to fundamentally reconsider his assumptions about success, expertise, and the value of non-traditional career paths. It's been quite a journey, I agree. Sometimes I think about that retirement party and how different everything might have been if Mr. Kowalski hadn't asked about the company owner. Would we have ever had these conversations? Would you have ever really understood what I was building? Dad was quiet for a moment, considering the hypothetical scenario. "I'd like to think I would have figured it out eventually, but honestly I'm not sure. I was so invested in my own narrow definition of professional success that I might have continued missing what was right in front of me." Sometimes it takes a shock to force us to see clearly. The afternoon brought a series of meetings with potential new hires as we continued expanding our team to meet growing client demand. The candidates were impressive, experienced digital marketing professionals from major agencies, who were attracted to our company's reputation for innovative traditional industry transformation. During the interviews, I found myself reflecting on how much my role had evolved since the early days of Martinez digital strategy. What had started as hands-on client work had gradually shifted toward strategic oversight, team leadership, and thought leadership within the digital marketing industry. The Harvard Fellowship would represent another evolution, allowing me to influence the next generation of entrepreneurs, while continuing to grow my own expertise. The final interview of the day was with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a former marketing professor who wanted to transition from academia to practical application. Her background in organizational psychology and change management, made her an ideal candidate for our traditional industry transformation practice. What attracts me most about your company, Jennifer explained, is your reputation for understanding the human aspects of digital transformation. Most agencies focus on technical implementation, but your approach recognizes that successful change requires cultural adaptation as well. The observation highlighted something I'd learned through years of working with traditional industries. Technology adoption without cultural consideration typically failed, while integrated approaches that addressed both technical and human factors consistently succeeded. Our success rate with traditional industry clients is over 90%, I replied, largely because we invest time upfront, understanding organizational culture and designing change management strategies that work with existing company dynamics, rather than against them. After Jennifer departed, I spent the evening reviewing quarterly reports that demonstrated the continued growth and success of Martinez's digital strategy. Revenue had increased 40% over the previous year, employee satisfaction surveys showed exceptional results, and client retention rates remained above industry benchmarks. But the metrics that mattered most weren't financial or operational, they were personal. The company had become exactly what I'd envisioned when I started it, a place where talented people could build meaningful careers, while helping traditional businesses thrive in evolving markets. The drive home took me past the Desert Ridge Country Club where Dad's retirement party had taken place 5 years earlier. The venue looked the same, but everything else had changed so dramatically that the evening felt like a chapter from someone else's life. That night had been one of the most painful experiences of my adult life, forcing me to confront the reality that my own family didn't understand or value what I'd accomplished, but it had also been the catalyst for the most important conversations and relationship transformations of my life. The invisible daughter who had stood in the corner of that ballroom, dismissed and overlooked, had built something that commanded respect from Harvard Business School, CNN Business, and industry leaders across the country.
More importantly, she had found her voice within her own family, demanding the recognition she deserved and refusing to accept dismissal as normal or acceptable. The journey from that painful evening to this moment of professional triumph had required courage, persistence, and an unwavering belief in my own worth, even when the people closest to me failed to recognize it. But it had also required forgiveness, patience, and the willingness to allow relationships to evolve when people demonstrated genuine commitment to change. Saturday morning brought our monthly family brunch, a tradition that had emerged from our weekly lunch meetings and grown to include extended family members who had previously been peripheral to our lives. Mom had become the enthusiastic organizer of these gatherings, using them as opportunities to celebrate everyone's achievements and maintain connections that might otherwise fade amid busy professional schedules. As I walked into my parents' backyard, where tables were set under the desert sun and conversation flowed freely among 3 generations of family members, I was struck by how natural and comfortable these gatherings had become. The artificial hierarchy that had once characterized family interactions had been replaced by genuine interest in each other's lives and authentic celebration of diverse forms of success. Carlos approached with his teenage daughter Elena, who had been following my company's social media accounts and expressing interest in entrepreneurship as a potential career path. "Aunt Rebecca, could you tell me more about how you started your business?" Elena asked with the earnest curiosity of a 16-year-old exploring future possibilities. "I'm thinking about starting an online jewelry business, but I don't know where to begin." The question sparked a lengthy conversation about entrepreneurship fundamentals, digital marketing basics, and the importance of understanding target markets before launching any business venture. Elena listened with the kind of focused attention that reminded me of myself at her age, when I'd been building websites for local businesses while my family dismissed it as a hobby. "The most important thing to remember," I told Elena, as our conversation concluded, "is that business success requires both passion and strategy. Love what you're doing, but also understand your numbers, know your competition, and always focus on providing genuine value to your customer." As Elena walked away to join her cousins, Dad appeared beside me with that familiar expression of pride and wonder. 5 years ago, I would have worried about Elena getting distracted from traditional career paths by entrepreneurship ideas, he admitted. "Now I hope she has half the business instinct and determination you've demonstrated. Watching you build something from nothing while maintaining your values and relationships has completely changed how I think about career success. The admission represented the complete reversal of attitudes and assumptions that had characterized Dad's transformation over these years. The man who had once viewed entrepreneurship as risky and unstable now saw it as potentially the most rewarding and impactful career path available. I hope Elena finds whatever path makes her happy and allows her to contribute meaningfully to the world, I replied, whether that's traditional employment, entrepreneurship, or something we haven't imagined yet. Mom called everyone to gather around the main table for lunch, and as I looked around at the assembled family members, parents, siblings, spouses, children, aunts, uncles, and cousins, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. The relationships that had once been strained by misunderstanding and dismissal had been transformed into connections based on mutual respect, genuine interest, and authentic celebration of each other's achievement. The retirement party that had forced painful truths into the open had ultimately created space for deeper, more honest relationships than had ever existed before. As we shared the meal Mom had prepared with her characteristic attention to detail, conversation flowed naturally among topics ranging from Elena's business ideas, to Uncle Roberto's latest construction projects, to Lucia's recent promotion to head nurse in her hospital department. What struck me most was how seamlessly discussions of my work now fit into these family conversations. Dad would mention potential client introductions, Mom would share articles she'd found about digital marketing trends, Carlos would ask for advice about his law practice's online presence, and Lucia would discuss how healthcare organizations could better serve patients through digital communication tools. The expertise that had once been invisible to my family had become a valued resource they turned to regularly, not just for professional advice, but as evidence of capabilities they were proud to claim as part of their family legacy. Late in the afternoon, as the gathering began to wind down and family members started making departure preparations, Dad pulled me aside for a private conversation that had become our traditional way of ending these family events. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something I've been thinking about for weeks," he began, his voice carrying unusual gravity. "Next month marks 5 years since my retirement party, and I've been reflecting on everything that's happened since then. I want you to know that evening was both the most embarrassing and most important night of my life." The statement surprised me with its emotional weight. Dad rarely spoke in such definitive terms about personal experiences, preferring practical observations to emotional revelation. "What do you mean?" I asked, settling into a patio chair beside him. "I mean that night forced me to confront truths about myself and my relationships that I'd been avoiding for years. I realized I'd been so invested in my own limited understanding of success that I'd become blind to different forms of achievement, even when they were demonstrated by my own daughter." Dad paused, seemingly gathering his thoughts before continuing. "But more than that, I realized I'd been failing as a father in ways I never recognized. Supporting your children means seeing them clearly, understanding what they're actually accomplishing, and celebrating their achievements, even when they don't match your own expectations." The confession was more vulnerable and self-aware than any conversation we'd ever had. Dad's journey of understanding had extended far beyond simply learning about my business, to fundamentally reconsidering his approach to relationships and family dynamics. "That night changed everything for both of us," I agreed. "But Dad, what matters most is what happened afterward. You were willing to learn, to change, to admit when you'd been wrong." "Not everyone has that kind of courage. I had to change," he replied simply. Watching Richard Kowalski recognize your expertise while I stood there completely ignorant about my own daughter's career made me realize I had a choice. I could continue being defensive about my ignorance, or I could admit my mistakes and work to understand what I'd been missing. As the sun set over Phoenix and the last family members departed, I reflected on the profound transformation that had occurred in all our lives since that retirement party 5 years ago. The painful revelation that had forced uncomfortable truths into the open had ultimately created the foundation for stronger, more authentic relationships than any of us had previously experienced. The invisible daughter had become visible not just to her family, but to an entire industry that now sought her expertise and leadership. The business that had been dismissed as a hobby had evolved into a company that influenced how traditional industries approached digital transformation across the Southwest. Most importantly, The family relationships that had been strained by misunderstanding and limited perspectives had been rebuilt on foundations of respect, curiosity, and genuine appreciation for each other's unique contributions to the world. As I drove home through the familiar Phoenix streets, I thought about the Harvard Fellowship opportunity and what it might mean for the next chapter of my professional journey. Teaching the next generation of entrepreneurs while continuing to grow my own expertise represented exactly the kind of challenge that had always motivated me most. But regardless of what professional opportunities emerged, the personal victory was already complete. The girl who had once felt invisible in her own family had not only found her voice, but had helped transform family dynamics in ways that would benefit future generations. The retirement party had ended with shock, embarrassment, and painful realization, but it had begun something far more valuable, a journey toward authentic relationships, genuine understanding, and the kind of family connections that celebrate rather than diminish individual achievements. Sometimes the moments that hurt us most become the catalysts for the changes we need most. Sometimes being truly seen requires the courage to demand recognition rather than accepting dismissal. And sometimes when people are willing to grow and change, the most painful revelations can become the foundation for the strongest and most meaningful relationships of our lives. 10 years later, I'm standing on the stage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., preparing to accept the National Entrepreneur of the Year award from the Small Business Administration. The audience of 1,500 business leaders, government officials, and media representatives represents the pinnacle of professional recognition in America. But what makes this moment truly extraordinary is the presence of my entire extended family in the front rows, led by Dad, whose face radiates a pride so profound it seems to illuminate the entire auditorium. Martinez Digital Strategies has evolved far beyond anyone's initial vision, including my own. What began as a one-person freelance operation now encompasses over 200 employees across 12 offices, spanning from Seattle to Miami. We've become the nation's leading consultancy for traditional industry digital transformation, with case studies taught at business schools from Harvard to Stanford, and methodologies adopted by Fortune. The path to this recognition began with a phone call 3 months ago from Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Senate Small Business Committee. Her office had been tracking my company's growth trajectory and impact on traditional manufacturing industries, particularly our role in helping American manufacturers compete more effectively in global digital markets. Ms. Martinez, the senator, had said during our initial conversation, "Your company's work represents exactly the kind of innovation America needs to maintain manufacturing competitiveness in the 21st century. The transformation strategies you've developed have helped preserve thousands of manufacturing jobs, while positioning traditional companies for sustainable growth." The conversation had led to congressional testimony about digital transformation's role in economic development, which in turn had generated the nomination for this national award. But beyond the professional recognition, what moved me most was understanding how my work had contributed to preserving communities and livelihoods across industries that might otherwise have struggled to adapt to changing markets. As I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the distinguished audience, my thoughts drifted to a conversation I'd had with Dad just that morning. He'd called from Phoenix, as excited as I'd ever heard him, to share news that perfectly captured how completely our relationship had transformed over the past decade. "Nisha, you'll never believe what happened yesterday," he'd said, his voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "I was at the grocery store wearing that Martinez Digital Strategies polo shirt you gave me, and a stranger approached me asking if I knew anything about your company. Turns out he owns a small manufacturing business and had heard about your work through industry contact." Dad had spent 45 minutes in a grocery store parking lot explaining digital transformation concepts to a complete stranger, using terminology and insights he'd absorbed through years of our conversation. The man who had once been unable to describe what his daughter did for a living had become an articulate advocate for digital marketing strategy. By the end of our conversation, he was asking for your business card and saying he wanted to discuss a potential consulting engagement. Dad had continued, "Rebecca, I understood every question he asked, and could answer most of them. 10 years ago I couldn't even explain what digital marketing meant, and yesterday I was conducting a business development conversation in a grocery store parking lot." The transformation represented more than just Dad's growing understanding of my work. It illustrated how our entire family had evolved to embrace perspectives and possibilities they'd never previously considered. Mom had become an avid follower of business publications, regularly sending me articles about entrepreneurship and digital innovation. Carlos had expanded his law practice specifically to serve entrepreneurs and small businesses, inspired by watching my journey. Lucia had left her hospital position to start a healthcare consulting firm focused on patient communication technology. The award ceremony began with a video presentation, highlighting the achievements of all 5 finalists for the National Entrepreneur of the Year recognition. Watching my company's story unfold on the Kennedy Center's massive screens felt surreal, particularly the segments featuring client testimonials from business owners whose companies had been transformed through our digital strategies. Margaret Whitfield, now a close friend and board advisor whose manufacturing company had become one of our signature success stories, appeared in the video to discuss how our partnership had tripled her company's revenue while preserving the traditional values and employee relationships that had always defined Mountain States manufacturing. Rebecca Martinez didn't just help us implement new technology, Margaret explained to the camera. She helped us understand that innovation and tradition aren't opposing forces. Her strategies allowed us to honor our company's heritage, while embracing tools that positioned us for future growth. The segment concluded with footage from my Harvard Fellowship classes, where I'd spent a transformative semester teaching graduate students about building businesses that balance profitability with social impact. The fellowship had evolved into an ongoing relationship with the business school, including development of a case study program that tracked traditional industry transformations across multiple economic sectors. When my name was announced as the award recipient, the applause was sustained and enthusiastic, but the sound that mattered most was Dad's distinctive whistle, the same one he'd used to cheer for Carlos's football games and Lucia's school performances decades earlier. Hearing that familiar sound directed toward my achievements represented the complete resolution of the invisibility I'd experienced for so many years. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking directly at my family as I opened my acceptance speech. 10 years ago I stood in a different kind of room, feeling completely invisible while my own father introduced everyone in our family except me to his colleagues. Tonight I stand before you as proof that sometimes our greatest professional achievements emerge from our most painful personal moments. The speech continued with reflections on entrepreneurship, digital transformation, and the responsibilities successful business owners have to support their communities and industry. But the core message focused on the importance of seeing and valuing people's contributions, even when those contributions don't match our preconceived notions of success. The most important lesson I've learned building Martinez digital strategies isn't about marketing techniques or technology implementation, I explained. It's about the power of authentic recognition. When we truly see people's capabilities and celebrate their achievements, we unlock potential that can transform not just individual lives but entire industries and communities. Following the ceremony, the reception provided opportunities to connect with other award recipients, government officials, and business leaders from across the country. The conversations reinforced how much my company's work had resonated beyond our immediate client base, influencing policy discussions about manufacturing competitiveness and economic development in traditional industry. Secretary of Commerce Robert Chen approached with genuine enthusiasm about our methodologies and their implications for national economic strategy. Ms. Martinez, your company's approach to traditional industry transformation has caught the attention of our trade development. We're particularly interested in how your strategies might help American manufacturers compete more effectively in international markets. The conversation led to discussions about potential government partnerships and consulting opportunities that could expand our impact to a national scale. But what struck me most was how naturally these high-level policy discussions flowed from the foundation I'd built, serving individual businesses, one client at a time. Throughout the evening, I found myself repeatedly checking my phone for messages from family members who were sharing photos and updates about the ceremony with their own social network. Mom had apparently become something of a social media celebrity among her friends,
regularly posting about my achievements with the enthusiasm of a dedicated marketing manager. The most touching message came from Elena, my niece, who had asked about entrepreneurship during that family brunch years earlier. Now a freshman at Arizona State University studying business and digital marketing, she'd built a successful online jewelry business that was funding her education while providing experience in e-commerce and customer service. Aunt Rebecca, watching you accept that award tonight made me cry happy tears, her text read. Thank you for showing me that building something meaningful is possible, and for always believing I could follow my own path even when other people thought I was too young or inexperienced. Elena's success represented the ripple effects of transformation that extended far beyond my immediate family. By demanding recognition for my own achievements and refusing to accept dismissal as normal, I'd created space for the next generation to pursue their goals with confidence and family support. The following morning brought a breakfast meeting with my leadership team to discuss the opportunities and obligations that accompanied national recognition. The award had generated significant media attention and potential client inquiries, but it had also created expectations about our company's role in broader industry transformation initiatives. We need to be strategic about how we leverage this recognition, advised Jennifer Walsh, who had become our chief strategy officer and one of my most trusted advisors. The platform we've been given comes with responsibility to influence positive change beyond just our immediate business interest. The conversation led to decisions about expanding our pro bono consulting program for small businesses, developing scholarship opportunities for students pursuing entrepreneurship, and creating mentorship networks that connected experienced business owners with emerging entrepreneurs. But perhaps the most significant decision involved establishing the Martinez Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting entrepreneurship education and small business development in underserved communities. The foundation would be funded by a percentage of our company's annual profits and governed by a board that included not just myself but also Dad, whose transformation had taught him to recognize and nurture potential in others. I want the foundation to focus on helping people whose achievements might be overlooked or dismissed because they don't fit traditional success models, I explained to the team. Too many talented individuals never get the recognition or support they need because their paths don't match conventional expectations. The foundation's mission statement would reflect the lessons learned from my own journey, that success comes in many forms, that expertise deserves respect regardless of its packaging, and that authentic recognition can unlock potential that transforms individuals, families, and entire communities. Later that week, I flew back to Phoenix for a celebration dinner that Mom had been planning since learning about my award nomination. The gathering included not just immediate family but also extended relatives, family friends, and even some of Dad's former colleagues who had witnessed the transformation of our relationship over the past decade. Richard Kowalski, now retired from Southwestern Construction but still active in Phoenix business circles, offered a toast that brought the evening full circle. 10 years ago at Miguel's retirement party, I asked about the company owner we'd been trying to reach, never imagining she was standing right there in front of us. Tonight we celebrate not just Rebecca's national recognition but the journey that taught all of us to see more clearly, appreciate more deeply, and support more authentic. The toast was followed by speeches from family members who shared their own perspectives on how my journey had influenced their lives and relationships. Carlos spoke about how watching my perseverance had inspired him to take risks in his own career. Lucia discussed how my example had given her courage to leave secure employment and start her own consulting practice. But the most meaningful speech came from Dad, who had never been comfortable with public speaking but insisted on sharing his thoughts about the decade of growth and change we'd all experienced. When Rebecca was growing up, I thought my job as a father was to steer my children toward paths I understood, careers that looked like success to me, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eye. I realize now that the best thing I could have done was simply pay attention to what my children were actually building, what they were actually achieving, what they actually needed from me. He paused, looking directly at me with an expression of profound love and respect. Rebecca didn't need me to understand digital marketing to support her dreams. She needed me to see her clearly, believe in her capabilities, and celebrate her achievement. It took me far too long to learn that lesson, but I'm grateful beyond words that she never gave up on our relationship while I figured it out. The speech concluded with Dad's announcement that he would be joining the Martinez Family Foundation board, bringing his project management expertise and traditional industry knowledge to support emerging entrepreneurs whose backgrounds and goals might not fit conventional business models. As the evening wound down and family members began their departures, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us from that painful retirement party to this moment of shared celebration and authentic connection. The invisible daughter had not only become visible but had created a platform that would help others avoid the dismissal and misunderstanding I'd experienced. The business that had been dismissed as a hobby had evolved into a company that influenced national economic policy and industry transformation strategy. The family relationships that had been strained by limited perspectives and conditional support had been rebuilt as connections based on mutual respect, genuine curiosity, and unconditional celebration of each other's unique contribution. Most importantly, the lessons learned through struggle and growth had created a foundation for supporting others who might face similar challenges in demanding recognition for their achievements and refusing to accept invisibility as normal or acceptable. As I drove home through the Phoenix streets where this journey had begun, I thought about the young woman who had stood in the corner of an elegant ballroom, feeling dismissed and overlooked while her father introduced everyone except her. She couldn't have imagined that her moment of greatest humiliation would become the catalyst for achievements that would earn national recognition and create opportunities to influence positive change for countless others. The retirement party had been an ending disguised as a beginning, the end of accepting less than I deserved from the people who claimed to love me most, and the beginning of relationships built on truth, respect, and genuine appreciation for who I actually was rather than who others thought I should be. The National Entrepreneur of the Year award represented professional validation at the highest level, but the real victory was personal, finally being seen, understood, and celebrated by the family I'd never stopped loving, even when they failed to love me back the way I deserved. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who love us best but see us least clearly. And sometimes when truth finally emerges and people are willing to grow, that combination can create stronger, more authentic connections than ever existed before. The applause from the Kennedy Center had faded, but the sound that would echo longest was Dad's distinctive whistle, finally directed towards celebrating the daughter who had always been there, waiting to be seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.